All right, everyone. Thank you for staying with us, for making it through half the day here. We are moving into our afternoon sessions. If you're just joining us so far, we started with an engineering session focused on technical issues and some equipment concerns. After that, we moved to our beer module with tasting experts Liz Pratt and Lindsay Barr, as well as Will Kemper, from Chuck and Up Brewery, talking to us about finished product and how we handle that. Once again, we'd like to thank our main sponsor, BSG Craft Brewing. We've been really fortunate with this series, as well as the webinars we did over the summer. BSG has been really great with their support, really kind of no questions when we've gone to them and said, hey, we want to do this. Can you guys help? So, of course, we appreciate their continued support. We also appreciate the support of our other sponsor, Craft Beer Professionals. Marcus and myself had the opportunity to present for these guys about a month ago. A really fantastic Facebook group. They have also been fantastic in supporting us with this endeavor and others as well. We'd also like to thank our partners in this endeavor today, the Pittsburgh Brewers Guild. They are presenting our final module after this space. And of course, we appreciate their help as well. And of course, a little self-promotion. We are District Pittsburgh Master Brewers. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for this session, Mike Pound, and remove myself so that nobody has to see me anymore. So take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Adam. Hey guys, some of you will know who I am. I'm Mike Pound. I've been writing about craft beer here in Pittsburgh for over 10 years now. That experience currently includes hosting and producing Beer Me, which is the video series on the industry in and around Pittsburgh from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I've often been accused of being the luckiest guy in Pittsburgh because I've somehow managed to turn my interest in craft beer into this gig, or visiting breweries and discussing trends and trying to make the industry just a little more accessible for consumers. I do not dispute that. This has been a phenomenal thing, being able to write about the industry, write about what it does, and bring that to readers and viewers. Our three panelists all have had success in that part of the beer world as well, some in addition to other gigs that they have in the business. The cool thing for our purposes today is that all three kind of came at their success from different starting points. We're going to hear some about what they've accomplished and how they got here, but we're also going to hear how you or someone on your team can have similar success. And keep in mind that we're not just talking about journalistic pursuits here. I think this will be a valuable discussion for anyone who is concerned about marketing their products or their brewery. And I assume that's going to be pretty much everyone who's listening today. Real quickly about the format. Each guy has a short presentation. Moderators may have a couple quick questions for them at the end of that. We may have a couple quick questions for the whole group once all three have presented, and then we're going to open it up to you guys. So, whatever comments or discussions or questions you have, you'll have plenty of time. Our first guest is an actual wizard. Ashton Lewis is the technical sales manager for BSG Craft Brewing's Central Midwest Territory and a partner at Springfield Brewing in Springfield, Missouri. Ashton spent a couple decades with Paul Mueller Company, where he was the company's staff master brewer and a brewing group sales manager. And importantly, for our purposes today, Ashton is the technical editor at Brew Your Own magazine, where he also writes, and here's the intro thing, the Help Me Mr. Wizard column. Ashton, welcome.
Thank you.
You bet. Take it away. It's all yours.
So I've got the screen now. I'm going to share my my screen, and let's make sure that I get this done correctly. Do you all see my screen?
Yes, we do. Got it.
Awesome. Well, today I am presenting a kind of an I think it's interesting, an interesting talk that I've titled The Continuum of Brewing Knowledge Through the Lens of a Q&A Columnist. So as you mentioned, actually you have an older version of my resume. I'm no longer part of Springfield Brewing Company. I'm full-time with BSG right now, and my current BSG title is National Accounts Manager. But I've been with Brew Your Own magazine for going on 26 years now, since 1995. So I'm going to give kind of a perspective about what I would consider and for my world, the continuum of brewing knowledge. and how ideas are passed along from different things. So, what do we do as writers, or journalists that maybe speak, or if you're a brewer watching this, communicating with your customers? We produce words, and there's a lot of different words that are produced in our industry. We've got research words, observations. For a journalist writing about what we see out in the market, we might write about solutions to problems. In my case, as a Q&A columnist, give advice. It's kind of like a click and clack column sometimes. There's critics out there that write beer critiques. There's stories, opinions, and then I hate to say this, I'm in sales, but some of the things that I would trust the least are sales pitches, because you really don't know where these ideas are coming from sometimes. So the question I have right now is word origins. Where do these words originate from? And I think in the world of brewing, in particular, we certainly have our gurus and thought leaders in our industry. And the question I think is kind of interesting is, where do these gurus come from? The gurus and thought leaders. And I like the word guru. I think it has an interesting sound. So I've got a little definition here, but I think a lot of the gurus and thought leaders kind of spin off from others. And I've got a beer relevant thing here: yeast cells that are budding. So oftentimes there's somebody that's influential in the industry, and they might have a pupil or somebody that they've mentored, and that individual spins off from the mother cell, so to speak, and now we have a daughter cell that's the new guru or the new thought leader. And some examples that we have, I'm speaking to an audience here that's younger than me, but in my generation, my brewing gurus, really the one that was kind of that I kind of looked up to and idolized was Ken Grossman, which is probably not uncommon. But others, we have my fellow panelists today: Mitch Steele, Garrett Oliver from Brooklyn Brewing, Kim Jordan from New Belgium. But this is one type of thought leader we have in our industry. So these are sometimes an innovative brewer, a trailblazer, somebody that does something new, or sometimes these kind of people become celebrities. And I think that the four that I have pictures of here really embody all four of those. So that's one type of thought leader that we have in brewing. Another type is a home brewer or visionary. There's so many craft brewers that started out home brewing that I think it's really hard to talk about craft brewing without acknowledging how important home brewers are to our industry. And perhaps more importantly to the home brewer is who do they get their information from? And these are just some 3 examples that I pulled. Of course, Charlie Papazian was so influential to homebrewing and continued to be influential in our industry through not only legislation, but driving, getting people brought into our hobby. Many of the hobbyists turned professional. Byron Birch, now deceased, was I don't know if that's a name that a lot of people know, but from the West Coast, the Beverage People is a homebrew store, and Byron was very, very influential to the people that came through that store, and he did writing and wrote books and provided education to homebrewers. And then another contemporary of mine through my work at Brewer Magazine is Gordon Strong, who oversees the BJCP program. But these types of people are also mentors and leaders in their world of beer. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that. But a little note I have over here, these leaders have attracted folks to the world of beer and then help kind of put them down their different paths. So, we have a lot of brewers that come in and they're home brewers, or just they're hobbyists and they love brewing beer at home, and that might be their path. But then there's brewers that are, that go on to become professional brewers. Then I've picked on one particular educator, my mentor, Michael Lewis. And educators are also gurus, but I separated them a little bit here, and I say professional gurus often find themselves leading large groups for entire careers. I know in my case and experience with working with Michael Lewis, he didn't come to the United States seeking to be a brewing professor. It happened. And then he certainly didn't seek to become a leader of hundreds and hundreds of students through his career. It's something that evolved over time. And we can see that with other educators who they might be scientists or other types of educators and academia that find themselves in this world where they end up being so influential to the industry. And I was Googling images of Michael Lewis the other day, and I found this is from the 1970s, and it's actually a video of him lecturing to a group of students about malting for the purpose of distillation in the 1970s. And it was interesting to watch that because during his lecture, one of the students asked about using cornflakes for mashing, and they have a fun conversation about Kellogg's cornflakes, and then another student asked about using popcorn. So the notion of using cereals is certainly something that's not new today. For those of you who recognize people in photographs, this is an old picture of Dr. Lewis here, and I'm having an absolute brain fart right now. I'm gonna have to come back and identify this famous gentleman from New Albion Brewing Company, but I'm embarrassed that I can't remember his name right now. Jack McAuliffe. But anyhow, that's a little bit about the professorial type of mentor. Then we've got our observers, journalists, and storytellers. And I think that the world of craft beer, it's so important for the wordsmiths out there to be part of our industry. And again, I've selected a couple people that I've looked up to: Michael Jackson, Fred Eckhart. Unfortunately, both have passed on. And then contemporary of ours today, Horst Dornbusch from Germany. But the journalists are interesting, I think, for beer because they document what they see. They chronicle their observations, and some of their observations have put them in a light where they've become part of the story. And then they continue to write about things that they have influenced. And I think that that's certainly true of these three authors here, where they influence the industry, and then they write about things that are occurring today that were influenced from yesterday's writing. So I'm here. I'm a journalist and a brewer and do other things. But so for my world, just to share my own story here, why did I get into the world of writing? Well, to be honest, I stumbled into it. It was literally Brew Your Own magazine started in Davis, California in 1995. And somebody, Carl Landau, the founder of the magazine, called into the brewing lab looking for somebody to work for his magazine. And I happened to be the person that took the call, so to speak. But when I started writing, I wanted to give back to some things that I found difficult for me. So I started homebrewing in 1986 when I was in high school. I grew up in Maryland, and I remember with my best friend Tom Flores, who's a brewer in Maryland right now, we went to the University of Maryland library looking for books on brewing. And I remember there's a three-part series called Brewing Science edited by Pollock and Poole. And it was pretty dense. And I was like, geez, isn't there anything easy for homebrewing? And at the time, yeah, we found homebrewing books, but there was a limited amount of information. So I started writing because I was asked to do it, but then I also found it interesting to give back. But over the years, I found that writing a Q&A column has really kind of kept me connected with people that are seeing brewing or brewing problems for the first time. And it's kept me interested in something for my entire career that I feel lucky to be part of. And over the last 25 years, I've seen a lot of new things come up. I mean, these are just words, to throw up on a screen, but, social media, a huge thing. The Q&A columns that are out there on social media are really, really vibrant today. But they bring up the question of, what to believe, who are the authors of some of this information, and is it actually correct? Then we've got new gurus emerging. We've got new styles coming about, words that I'd never heard of until, recent years: milkshake IPA, pastry stout. We've got, other new words, hop bursting, biotransformation, hop creep, nano brewery, and we've got our problems. This came up later here. Crispy boys, what the heck's a crispy boy? We've got problems today. Diastaticus, exploding cans, great meetings that have been canceled. So a lot of cool stuff over the last 25 years. But over these 25 years, there's a few things that I kind of take away that I call musings from a beer writer. One is the thirst for beer knowledge is never quenched. People are always looking for knowledge, and that knowledge, spans the spectrum of new to old. We always have a flow of new people into the industry. Things that are interesting to us from 25, 30 years ago, all that stuff is still fresh to people that are new in the industry. And I don't think that people get tired of the basics. But of course, we have, from our industry as brewers, new ideas, new techniques, and new beers make our industry exciting and fun, keeps us as brewers interested, and keeps our customers interested. Couple positive things here: High Kreuzen Lifts Brown Hefe. I think that's an expression or something like that, where we all succeed and help the industry. The best brewers never stop increasing their goals for excellence. And then the last thing that I have on here, and I'll shut up for a few minutes, is writers are not always right, which I think is an important thing to remember. So that's kind of maybe a strange introduction to this topic, but well, thank you for District Pittsburgh for inviting me. And yes, that is a hop hat, and that's what I have. Thank you.
I need one of those hats. That's spectacular. That is.
I got it from Etsy, is where it came from.
Okay. I a couple things crossed my mind as you were talking. The idea of gurus is really interesting, and it's we all need that kind of guide, that professional help, right? Regardless of what our profession is, it's good to have people in that kind of position who can kind of keep us on the right path. Is it more difficult to find a guru now than it was when you got into this business? I mean, because there are so many people, and you even referenced this at the end of your presentation. Who do I listen to? Who do I trust? Who do I believe? Is having potentially many more gurus actually more difficult to kind of sort through that stuff than it would have been when you were getting started?
That's an interesting question, Mike. I hadn't really thought about the number being the negative, but when I started, when I was looking for really a place to study in graduate school, in the United States, we had UC Davis and Siebel, really the two main educational. I mean, if you wanted to study brewing, then there was Weinstefan and Harriet Watt in England. There really weren't that many, or in Scotland, there weren't that many options for education. But yet today there are a lot of options, not only through universities, community colleges, private study. So I think it is difficult to qualify who you're listening to. And in fact, I can't remember the year, but it was several years ago. There was a meeting at a craft brewers meeting, and it was about brewing education. And Tom Schellhammer got his PhD at Davis when I was getting my master's, and Dr. Schellhammer brought up the topic of accreditation and really knowing who you're listening to, because it's an important thing that in our industry we're not engineers, we're not physicians, we don't have a true professional qualification. I mean, we might have we might be a degreed engineer or have a degree in food science or something, but we don't have a professional qualification of brewing necessarily. So yeah, I think it is difficult to qualify your guru.
Okay. Are you, when you got started with this, and you said you were the guy kind of lucky enough to pick up the phone when someone was looking for a writer, how did you approach this? I mean, writing an advice column about homebrewing could get really technical. But as you said, when you were a kid just getting started, you found stuff that was super technical and thought it was a bit difficult to digest. Was it hard for you to find a balance between the technical stuff that is necessary and just being an approachable writer who's also going to be helpful?
Well, if it wasn't completely clear in my little presentation, I'm a huge fan of my mentor, Michael Lewis, and Dr. Lewis's real skill as an educator was his ability to bridge the gap between the simple and the complex, and he was able to package things where people could understand. So I had an incredible mentor, and I did a lot of teaching when I was a student. So I tried to approach writing in the same way, where somebody asks a question, I don't want to make it simple, but I don't want to overcomplicate it. And that's the thing that I enjoyed, that I continue to enjoy about writing, is trying to help people through advice without, bullshitting them with too much information or extraneous information that doesn't really make any sense.
Okay. I don't know if the moderators have any other questions, or if we're ready to move to the second presentation. Ashton, thank you very much. I appreciate this. I know you're going to hang out for a bit, and then we're going to have some more stuff from you, both from us and from the audience here in a little bit.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet. Thank you. Next up, we have Pete Brown, and I'm fascinated to hear what he has to say. Pete is kind of more the cjournalistic approach for this. He attended University of St. Andrews. His early forays into the beer industry, writing copywriting, advertising products for Stella Artois and Heineken. His first book, Man Walks into a Pub, A Sociable History of Drinking, was published in 2004, and there have been 9 others following that. The one that I'm fascinated about, and I had not heard of this before, Shakespeare's Local, 6 Centuries of History Seen Through One Extraordinary Pub. I'm going to make an effort to track that one down. And then his most recent book, because he seems to enjoy a good argument, is called Craft, an Argument, where he takes on the subject of craft beer. Should it be called that? Should it not? I'm not through it yet. I just started a couple days ago, but it is engaging and definitely thought provoking. So, Pete Brown, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks very much. Very nice to be here. I just want to pick up on that point about advertising. That definitely was my route into beer. Mm-hmm. I don't drink Stella Artois anymore, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Stella.
Sure.
And I was working on. I'm going back to that point about gurus. We were working on Stella's first brand extension, Artois Bock, in the late 90s, and the guys from Interbrew, as it was then, handed us a half sheet of A4 paper, which was everything they knew about Artois Bock, because it was a previous beer. And so I read the sheet of paper that we'd just been given, and people said, "Oh, so how should we position this new Stella Artois beer, this Artois Bock? What should we say about it?" And I said, "Well, we could always tell the truth." And I said, "What's?" And people said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, we could always say it's the first beer the Artois brewery brewed 30 years before they first brewed Stella Artois." And everyone said, "How did you know that?" And I said, I read the piece of paper we were just given 10 minutes ago. And it was no good. After that, everyone said, "Oh, beer guru, you're our beer guru." It's like, okay, I can read. If that makes me a beer guru, I'll take the title.
It doesn't hurt. That's a good start.
Absolutely. So I was asked today to talk about the craft book, which I just finished. My next book is actually out on this coming Friday, so I've had a busy lockdown.
Yeah.
But books come by accident. There's a saying in the UK about you wait for a bus for an hour and then 3 buses turn up at once, and I often find it's like that in books. So has someone got I think Marcus has got the share screen with my slides. Okay, so here's this book, it's got across the top there. My vindication of this crazy project was that it actually won Best Beer Book at the North American Guild of Beer Writers Awards last month, which I was obviously delighted by. But at the start of lockdown, I found myself in a very strange position. I suppose we all did, but I write about the hospitality industry, and in the UK, the hospitality industry was shut down a week before the general lockdown. And I'm a parasite on the hospitality industry. So as soon as pubs were closed and breweries closed, every single bit of work I had disappeared. And I was left with no income and no work and nothing to do. My wife and I both suffer from pre-existing health conditions, which meant that we were locked down 2 weeks before anyone else. So we found ourselves locked in the house with nothing to do and no money coming in. and I decided to try and write something partly for to preserve my sanity and partly to try and earn some money. I've never been down the self-publishing route before. There are obviously various routes to getting a book published, and the guys organising this session asked me to talk specifically about the process of writing this. I could speak about the subject matter, about the definition of craft beer. I don't know if you can see it on here, but my subtitle is "Where the term craft beer is completely undefinable, hopelessly misunderstood, and absolutely essential." But I only have 10 minutes. And it almost takes that long to say the words. So we'll talk about the process of writing the book and maybe leave the subject matter and the argument around it for another time. So I'm kind of in an unusual position for beer writers in that I've written quite a lot of books about beer, but I always seem to end up writing them from a very UK-centric perspective most of the time. And so I tend to have a lower profile in the States, in North America, than some of my contemporaries do. So I start off by trying to tell stories about how beer fits into culture. And I come at it much more from a societal, cultural, people point of view than I do from the kind of technical brewing aspect. That's something I remedied with Miracle Brew a few years ago, which did get a US publication, which is really a deep dive into hops, barley, yeast, and water from a non-brewer's perspective. But mainly I write about how beer fits into our culture and how it impacts on our culture, our society, and our history. And I was very fortunate at the start of my career in that I got picked up by mainstream commercial publishers. Not kind of specialist small presses that focus on one subject. And so my books got given the kind of big treatment that kind of big books get. And I sold pretty well and built up a pretty big profile. And then they decided that was enough beer, thank you very much. And I started getting a lot of comments from my agent and various editors about, "We love your writing style. Please don't stop writing. Please give us another book. Could you just not say any more about beer or cider and just kind of find something else to write about?" So my last book, Pie Fidelity, was an exploration of traditional British food and a defense of traditional British food against the global accusation that it's absolutely awful quality and absolutely terrible, none more vociferously expressed than by the British themselves. And so I've kind of got two routes in my writing now. One's going mainstream and broader and kind of leaving beer behind, but I don't want to leave beer behind. And when I want to write about beer, that means kind of going a different route than I was lucky enough to go in the first place. I've been fascinated by the definition of craft beer for a long time. And I first heard the term in about 2004 on my first trip to America for Three Sheets to the Wind. And as I can see from a brewing point of view, it's very frustrating, and from certainly from a small brewer's point of view, I can totally understand the anger, the justified anger about the term being appropriated by bigger brewers. But from a writing point of view, I'm fascinated by the linguistics, by the logic, by the argument around it, about this kind of massive movement that's a global multi-billion-dollar industry, and something people get so passionate about that sort of avoids every single attempt to give it a meaningful definition. And I've been thinking about it for a very long time. And I found a book about a year ago, well, getting 2 years ago now, that talked about craft in its much broader sense, and talked about basket weaving and mowing hay and trimming hedges and doing things by hand. And rejecting machinery and kind of using the physical movement of the body to get tasks done. And that made me think, why don't I explore craft? Forget beer for a second and explore craft in a much broader sense and see if I can bring that back to beer. And I start every book with a reading list that kind of reads around the subject. So this was my initial reading list for this book. You may recognize some of the titles, and I'm guessing not others. And the thing about this was, I'm into a very niche subject here. My publishers and my agent, when I mentioned this book idea, they simply wouldn't even, they pretended they hadn't heard me. I mean, it was just, they just didn't want to engage with it at all. So I always knew this was going to be a book that I was going to do on my own. And so when lockdown hit, I thought, damn it, you know what? I'm going to do the craft book. And I set myself a target to write it in 13 weeks and to self-publish it. for the first time, and just see what happened. Just to do it, just for the sake of seeing what happened. Now, my wife runs a literary festival. She's the first reader of my books. She edits my books before they go to an editor. And so we set up this idea where she would be the editor, the publisher, the designer. She would learn the ins and outs of online publishing. She would design the front cover of the book, and she would edit it for me. And she would then would be the publicist of it. So we worked together as a team. Now, I'm never a fan of PowerPoint slides like this. I don't want to go through this point by point, but I just want to show you that this is what we actually did. I've got two columns. There's the writing column for me, and there's the producing column for Liz. And we got 13 weeks. We sat down and talked about this at the end of March, and I arbitrarily set the 25th of June as a publication date. So in the left-hand column, there's my word count. Whenever I write a book, I find that the discipline of setting myself a target is the thing that gets me through it. Because when you get to about week 4 in there, write 8,000 words this week and get it to a total of 42,000 words. That's the point as a writer when you're doing a book where you forget why you're doing it. You think, I must be insane. What's going on here? Well, I'm losing my way. I think I did get writer's block that week, actually. And on the right-hand side, while I'm doing that, there's Liz learning about publishing software, about different publishing platforms, how to get the book out there, about details like getting an ISBN number, legal copyright issues. There's always that thing on the kind of blurb page at the front of books where it says the author has asserted their right to be recognised as the author of this book. I always wondered if, before I had a book published, I thought, have I got to go to some kind of ceremony to assert my right to do that? And you just say it and it's fine. But all those kind of details that normally you don't think about when you're going through a normal publisher. What I did find out on this is that you need, if you're setting a schedule, you need to finish the book halfway through it, because you need as long for edits and rewrites as you do for the initial writing. So we got through this project and we published the book. It worked. We found, I guess to my regret, that Amazon was by far the best way of doing it. Amazon, by far the cheapest people to do print on demand. They also make it very easy to do ebooks. And so we launched with an ebook and with a print on demand book. And the great thing about this versus traditional publishing was that when I sign a contract with a publisher, it's country specific. I've had 11 books now published in the UK. I've had 2 books published in the US. I've had 2 books translated into Chinese and 1 book translated into Japanese. Each one of these is a separate publishing deal. If you're self-publishing through Amazon or an alternative, I wish we could find a good alternative, then you hit the whole world simultaneously. So this book published on the same day in North America, across Europe, in South Africa, Australia, and we got it up on every single different Amazon site. So although it may be a very, very niche book in one country, that niche is, hopefully my thinking was, that niche is quite large if you go to a global level. So that's one side of it, and then the other side is how to make sure that anyone knows that you've done it. And I'm fortunate in that I've been writing about beer for a long time, and I have built up quite a network. And the main part of my network, the center of it, is I have about 21,000 followers on Twitter now, and that's really how I used it. In fact, it's thanks to them that the project happened in the first place. I was mulling this idea over, and I thought, am I insane to try and write a book and self-publish it in 13 weeks? And I went onto Twitter and onto my Facebook page and said, if I was to write this book and publish it myself about craft beer, how much would you pay for it? What kind of price would I set for it? Would you be interested in buying it? And the response was overwhelming. People were like, Pete, I'll buy anything that you put out. You want to set people coming back with prices that were way higher than the ones I'd been thinking of. And it was that show of support, that show of just extreme enthusiasm that gave me the strength to do the book in the first place. So that was the place to start when I wanted to kind of then sell and distribute the book. And this emerged very haphazardly. My next slide looks really cool and organized, and it wasn't really like that at all. So everything started with my social media. My 3 social media feeds are Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I think if you're under 30, these are all hopelessly old-fashioned and out of date now. I don't know about TikTok and things like that, I'm afraid. And the route that I have for a long time is using that social media to drive traffic to my blog. And when I was doing this book, I decided to blog about it in real time. I did a blog post every week saying, if anyone's thinking of writing a book in lockdown while you can't do anything else, this is the process that I go through, and maybe it's going to be helpful. So hopefully the social media is driving traffic to the blog. But also this idea of writing a book in public, you normally are quite secretive about a book until it's pretty much ready for publication. And I was doing this very much in the open. And what was great about that was that the social media stuff led to lots of requests from around the world for interviews, for book reviews when it was written, for me speaking on podcasts about it. And I've done podcasts and interviews in the UK, in Canada, the United States, Australia, South Africa. It's been really great to get global coverage because there's been lots of people sitting there going, well, I'm not going to write a book, but hey, maybe I'll start a podcast, or maybe I'll put more energy into my podcast and do it more often and things like that. So I spoke to a lot of people around the world about the book while I was doing it. And then what I did just before the book launched was launch a Patreon site. And I offer various subscription levels on that. Try to give kind of a roster of benefits as you move up through the subscription levels on that. I used it to try and launch the book by saying that if anyone subscribed at £10 a month, they got a free ebook. If you subscribe at £25 a month, you got a free ebook plus your pick of any title from my back catalogue, that kind of thing. So hopefully all these things then feed back to people actually buying the book. And it's done well. It came out. I have money coming into my bank account from Amazon on a fairly regular basis. They're not huge sums, but we can access the sales figures. What's hilarious is when you get the sales figures from Amazon and you can see how few copies you need to sell to get into the top 10 beer books on Amazon. That's it's quite a sobering realization. But there's hardly been any days since the launch in June when we haven't sold a single copy. It's selling steadily. The publicity is carrying on, and I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. So that's the book. That's the physical copy that we ordered, and it's amazing to think that my wife and I did every single aspect of that on our own. That's her cover design. I think she did that pretty well, and the great thing about the Easter egg, the hidden joke in this, is that the photo of kegs on the front there is a stock photo of Budweiser kegs for a book on craft beer.
That's perfect. That's perfect, actually. Pete, writers will figure out a way to write. I'm curious about the jump that you took from being a copywriter to saying, okay, a book, why not? How did you work that out in your head when you were ready to get started?
Well, I've always been I've always wanted to be a writer. I won my first short story competition when I was 9 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was only one other entrant, and he was 7. So but it was a start.
Still.
And I didn't know what I wanted to write. I just knew that I wanted to write. And there's when I was working on Stella, and I was looking for a book that I wanted to read about the broader issues around the British beer market from this kind of social point of view. And there was a book published in '97 in the United States called Beer Blast by a guy called Philip Van Munching, who used to work for Van Munching & Co., who were the importers of Heineken for a long time before Heineken took it in-house. And he wrote this great book. I think the subtitle of the book is something like "The Bizarre Battles, the Beer Wars and the Bizarre Battles for Your Money." And it was about all the battles between Anheuser-Busch and Miller and Coors and stuff. But it set it within a social cultural context. And I thought, and at the time I'd just written a novel that was absolutely dreadful and she'll never see the light of day. And I read Beer Blast and I went, why doesn't someone write this book for the British beer market? It would be way more interesting. There'd be so much you could put in it. And I looked for it and then realized it didn't exist. And I just jumped on it. I just went, if this book doesn't exist, I've got to write it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, I'm curious about the idea, and maybe this is something that's specific to the British market. I would have a hard time fathoming that someone would take a good book proposal about craft beer to a publisher in the United States and having someone say, nah, we're not interested in that right now. The industry, being as it is, I would think a solid idea would at least get a look. How did it? I could be wrong about that. This is outside of my realm of expertise. How did it work out that you were getting pushback about writing a beer specific books in a time when I assume the British craft beer market was doing the same thing that's been doing here?
I think there are two sides to that. One is that the people who have an interest in my writing career definitely want to see me writing more broadly than beer. So they're just not going to entertain beer ideas. And yet there are still beer books being published, of course, because it is a very vibrant market. But what I suspect here, and just looking at figures, is that beer books are not selling particularly well. I think the rise of social media has, to a large extent, facilitated the current craft beer boom. I think the way it's allowed people to connect directly. And the positives of that definitely outweigh the negatives. But what it also seems to have done in the UK, I'd be interested to see if you think the same thing in the US. It seems to remove the need for these gurus. It seems to remove the need for the experts. If you're on Untapped and you've got some ratings on Untapped, and you've been to a Meet the Brewer event, and you've met your favorite rock star brewer, you don't need some writer. You don't need some old guy telling you about the history of IPA. You know everything. And you don't need anyone to tell you anything else. And I think that's led to, while there's been a huge surge of interest in beer, there's been a decline in kind of reading a classical, traditional book about it.
Okay. I want to check and see if the any moderators have additional questions for you, Pete, before we get started with Mitch. I guess I really appreciate your presentation. Please hang out for a bit. I know we're going to have more questions for you and everybody else. And we will move on. Our final guest is Mitch Steele. Most of us would know Mitch from his time at Stone. He is now working for himself at New Realm Brewing in Atlanta and Virginia Beach. He doesn't just make excellent beer, he's good at writing about it as well on the Hop Tripper blog. And in his book, IPA Brewing Techniques, Recipes, and the Evolution of India Pale Ale. Mitch, how you doing?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you joining us. If you've got your screen share all set up, let's go ahead and let you do your thing.
Okay.
There we go.
Can everybody can see it?
Yep,
okay.
Got it. Go ahead.
Good deal. So yeah, I was asked to talk about writing the book that I did on IPA, and so I'll tell a little bit about the story. This is the book here. This was published by Brewers Publications, which is an arm of the Brewers Association out of Boulder, California. And the way this whole thing started was that they reached out to Steve Wagner and Greg Cook at Stone Brewing Company and asked them if Stone would be interested in writing a beer styles book on India Pale Ale. And if you're familiar with the old beer styles books that the BA published, and in fact Ashton Lewis has one in the catalog, there wasn't really a book on IPA. There was a book on Pale Ale that covered IPA, but there wasn't a book specifically targeted towards IPA. So they wanted to round out the portfolio with a book on IPA. And so they asked us if we would do it. And I remember very clearly Steve coming into my office and telling me about the opportunity and asked if I'd be interested in doing it. And I thought about it for about 5 seconds. And I said, I'd love to do it. And so that's kind of how it all got started. And when Steve and I first started talking about it, we were going to co-write the book. And, as we went on and started doing research, we were divvying up parts of the book to write about. But it was a very interesting process because I'm not a writer. Obviously, I'm a brewer. I'm a fermentation science guy from UC Davis. I studied with Michael Lewis, like Ashton did, and I really didn't get into writing anything until this book came along. And so that was, I wrote some copy for some stuff at Anheuser-Busch and things like that when I was doing new products, but never really anything formal. So this is the stages of publishing my book. And like I was saying, this was all new for me. And so I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. And, and Steve and I started by developing a plan to do some research. And a lot of that was done online. But then we got the ability to do some Stone-sponsored trips. And I think that all happened. And this was the first time I met Pete. Was Steve and I were in London for the release of a collaboration beer that we did for the Wetherspoon pub chain. And it was a collaboration beer that we did down in Kent at the Shepherd Neame Brewery. And this was the rollout of the beer. And I remember at that event in London, running into Pete and chatting with him, and he was telling me about his book Hops and Glory, which hadn't been published yet. It was just about to be published, and I'm like, oh, this is a guy I need to talk to, because we had just signed on to do this book, and so we did some research trips, Steve Wagner and I did, which were absolutely marvelous, going to England, spending a lot of time in Burton-on-Trent and spending a lot of time in London and just researching as much as we could about India Pale Ale. And I remember very clearly calling Christy Switzer, who runs Brewers Publications, and telling her about the history. And I remember saying, Christy, this could be so much more than a beer styles book. And she came back to me and said, what I want you to do is write everything that you're learning, and then we'll figure out how to position the book, which was really kind of cool, because if you're familiar with the Brewers Publications books, they're not really long books. They're maybe 100 pages or so, and they've got recipes in it and homebrew recipes and some interviews with professional brewers and such. But we were able to take the research to a new level for this book. And after we finished the book, we developed an outline and then started writing. And when we started writing, Steve Wagner came to me and said, I can't do this. I cannot write this book. I've got writer's block. And I couldn't believe it, because Steve is one of the best writers that I know. I mean, he has a way with words that I always envied. And he just, Stone was growing like crazy, leaps and bounds at the time. And he said, I don't have the time. I'm not going to do it justice if I try to do this. And I've got writer's block. And he asked me if I wanted to get a ghostwriter. And I thought about it for a little bit, getting somebody, some beer writer to help me finish the book, because I had already been writing my parts of the book. And I said, Steve, I've got all the notes. I put together the outline. I put together all our notes. I'll just do it. And so I just powered through it. One of the interesting things that came out of this, I remember Stan Hieronymus, who writes wonderful books about beer and brewing and hops and such. He told me the hardest thing about writing a book like this was knowing when to stop researching. And that was absolutely true, because the research sucked me in, and I was living historical IPA for about 2.5 years. And I did have to stop at some point and just start writing the book. The last 3 parts of the book were, of getting the book out, was the editing process, the publication process, and marketing. And I will tell you, from my personal experience, the editing process was brutal. That was the hardest part of the whole process, because again, I'm not a writer. And so they were asking me questions that I couldn't answer. And I thought I had really good citations for all my statements, and I was missing some, and they were getting frustrated with me. And I thought I was really well organized, and it turned out I was not organized enough for the editing process. So that was a really tough thing. The biggest challenges of doing this, was organizing the notes and photos. I think, arranging the research trips was really challenging, but I enjoyed every minute of that. Steve and Greg decided that Stone was going to support this project with doing some other trips to England, and so we were able to combine trips with some collaboration brewing and things like that. But I remember the biggest trip we took that was about 2 weeks long. I put together a very detailed itinerary and spent weeks reaching out to people in England and asking them for some time and putting together a calendar of what we were going to do. And we had a very aggressive schedule, which always ended up drinking a lot of beer in the evenings. So the mornings, we had to jump on a train or something, were really kind of tough. But it was a really involved process, and reaching out to people, like Pete and Mark Dorber and some of the Martin Cornell and Ron Pattinson and some of the other people that helped us with the research on the book. It was hard, but I think the nice thing about it was that almost everybody was very agreeable to helping us out, and they wanted to see this book get published the way I was describing it. So it turned out to be easier than I thought, but I'm kind of an introvert, and reaching out to people that I don't know is very hard for me. So, and then some of the other challenges were just making sure I had myself organized, and then deciphering English brewing logs, which I will get into in just a minute.
Okay.
So these are some of the first books that I read in preparing myself to write this book, and these are all great books, and I learned so much from all of them. And the Durden Park Beer Club is a group of people that were very active in the early 70s that really researched some of these old styles, and they put out it's not really a book, it's more of a pamphlet, but it was a big help. And Steve Wagner and I spent a lot of time with Mark Dorber up in Burton-on-Trent, and some retired brewmasters from Bass that Mark and Roger Putman, who is a retired brewmaster from Bass, helped set up this 3-day conference we had on IPA. And a lot of we spent a lot of time going through the library at the Bass Museum, as it was called at the time. And we were one of the few people that were able to get in there around that time, which I think was probably 2010 or so. Mm-hmm. And they let us in, and they let us basically look at any book that we wanted to, as long as we wore gloves and had no pens and that kind of thing. And so, we were reading through these things, and I don't know how well it comes across in the slide, but the writing in these books is very ornate. And it was very hard to decipher, and try and understand what they were doing. And that's where, blogs like Ron Pattinson's Shut Up About Barclay Perkins came in, because he was deciphering these books on a regular basis and putting them into language that today's brewers understand. So that was very helpful. So a lot of surprises came with this book, and this is what sucked me in, into the research and everything. But I list a whole bunch of them here, and I'm not going to go into all of them. But the biggest thing was that India Pale Ale wasn't invented at all. It was a style that was brewed and hopped like a lot of other beer styles that were shipped to India, and it became the most popular one. And then I think as the Burton Brewers took over and started brewing it, they kind of developed it into a style that was very different than what else other beers were being brewed. But, there were a lot of myth-breaking moments in writing this book and doing the research, which was really fascinating to me. And, I learned a lot. I mean, obviously, I learned a tremendous amount about historical brewing in England, and really became fascinated with all the processes that were used. A couple other of the big surprises were that the IPAs were aged for a tremendous amount of time in casks or barrels before they were even put onto a boat. And so there were multiple stages of the fermentation that went on. And through the research and postulating with some of the retired brewmasters, the idea came up that this beer maybe had some beneficial impact of a Brettanomyces fermentation, either during the long aging or the boat trip. And there is research, scientific research, that shows that the yeast cultures in the United Kingdom, or in England rather, did have Brettanomyces in them when the Carlsberg Brewery started isolating yeast strains. They discovered Brettanomyces in English yeast cultures. So it was really kind of a cool thing, and there were a lot of moments like that. And just to give you some examples, here's a book, a historical book that I was able to get a copy of or read on Google Books or something. But there was a chart here showing the volumes of beers shipped to Calcutta, and it was very fascinating to me that the title of this table was Beer and Porter being shipped into Calcutta. And I came to learn that porter was very successfully shipped to India, and it really was not a problem. This was an interesting quote that I don't remember where I found this, but it was in regards to the Alsop Brewery, a Burton-on-Trent brewery, about what happened after the beer was bottled. And I'm assuming that the beer was shipped in casks to India and then bottled there, and then they would let the beer age. And this was kind of an interesting transition of the beer, and kind of justified the idea that maybe there was some Brettanomyces activity going on here, because something was going on. There was something going on that was making the beer taste better than it was when it arrived. And this is a chart that Pete gave me. When we sat down and talked with him over a few beers, and he gave me the English military specifications for purchased IPA, which I think is a very telling bit of documentation about how the beer was brewed, and really kind of confirmed everything else that we were reading about, the brewers using a lot of hops in these beers, and the casks that were used to age the beer when the beer was brewed, the fact that it had to be new hops, hops from that year's harvest, and then brewed between November and May. So the oldest the hops ever got was probably 6 or 7 months, and those kind of things. And it just kind of tied everything together. And then one of the other interesting things that I found out was that IPAs were being brewed all over the world, not just England, not just Burton-on-Trent. Scotland had a lot of people in India, and their brewers in Scotland were shipping a lot of IPA to Scotland for their folks there. The United States, the Frank Jones Brewery in New Hampshire was a big IPA brewer. C.H. Evans in Albany, New York, Fegan Span and Valentine, were other big IPA brewers in the United States. And then you've got brewers in Australia, like Finley's India Pale Ale coming from Australia. So it was very surprising to me that in the 1800s, especially the latter part of the 1800s, IPAs were being brewed all over the world, and some United States IPAs made their way to India, and that was really fascinating. The neat thing about Valentine IPA was the fact that it was the inspiration for both Fritz Maytag at Anchor Brewing to brew Liberty Ale, and Ken Grossman at Sierra Nevada when he was brewing the first batches of Celebration Ale. And they both, I heard from both of them that they were inspired by Valentine and the way Valentine tasted in the 1960s. And I think it was Michael Jackson who said Valentine IPA was the last remnant of true IPA in the world. Post-Prohibition in the United States and post all the changes and consolidations that happened in England. So obviously the research trips were tremendous fun for me. They're memories I will carry with me for the rest of my life. and it was one of the funnest parts of the book was meeting all these beer experts in England and great authors, and being able to sit down and talk with them in a pub over a couple of pints. It was absolutely wonderful. The serendipitous discoveries were fascinating. Telling stories about the beer. And telling what I learned, and sharing a little bit about what I had learned. And then after the book was published, I did a lot of traveling in the United States with Stone Brewing, and we usually tied in some book activities along with that. And it was great fun. And this is a shot at the White Shield Brewery at the Burton Museum. And this is a group of us. Some of these folks are retired brewmasters. Steve Wellington in the back there, right in front of the bus, is a guy that Pete Brown introduced me for, and I'm forever grateful to that, because Steve was a big help in sharing recipes and sharing brewing techniques about historical IPAs. And the two gentlemen seated on the left bench there, Mark Dorber and then Roger Putman, they're the ones that set this whole thing up. And I remember going to Roger, and just thanking him profusely for spending 3 days with Steve and myself, and just saying, I can't believe how generous you were setting this up. And he's just stopped me. He said, stop. This was tremendous fun for us too. So it was a great trip. You can see we were enjoying a lot of beers there, and we talked IPA for several days in Burton-on-Trent with some very knowledgeable people. And that wraps it up.
All right. I'm curious about one a thing specific to the book. Where did the myth that the IPA myth that everyone knows, that it was brewed to make the long trip from England to India, where did that come from?
Well, I think there are some sources that show that it came from writers in the 1800s in England. And then, of course, for me personally, it was stuff that was printed on craft beer literature in the late 1980s when a lot of people were just starting to brew IPAs. And so they put out, they eventually apparently found this quote from some historical texts in England. And I remember Martin Cornell specifically called it out to me, when I talked with him about, how this one quote was the one that fed this myth.
Wow.
And he's a big myth buster. So he was a lot of fun to talk to.
Okay. Did you have any hesitation about taking this project on? When you started kicking around the idea, I don't know if it's just was there anything that's like, this is outside my wheelhouse, I'm not sure. Tell me about what was going through your mind when you got started.
Well, I think the fact that Steve was originally going to do this with me and we were going to do it together kind of helped calm down those fears and that nervousness about doing it. And and then obviously when he bowed out of the project, most of the legwork was already done, and at that point, I just committed myself to getting it done, and damn the torpedoes, let's go. And
your comments about editors, but I think everyone has would say something like the best editors are the ones that are also the biggest pain in the asses, and that's been my experience as well. Was that the toughest part about this process for you?
Yeah, the editing process, because everything was very time sensitive at that point. And so, when they came back with comments and questions, I had to drop everything and get on it. And I think that aspect of it, because we were late in delivering the book, we were about 2 years later than what Brewers Publications wanted. And so by the time I submitted the original manuscript, we were on a very tight timeline to get it published. And I think that contributed a lot to the pain in the ass factor with the editing process, was the fact that it was a very compressed timeline to get it done.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Mitch, I really appreciate this. I think a couple other people, Marcus and Michael, are going to join us. And Marcus, I'm going to let you step in here and take over for a minute. Go ahead.
Sure, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming by. Obviously, a nice balance between presenters there. We're just going to have a quick look and see if we have any comments externally, and it doesn't look like that's the case, which is not ideal, but we can live with that. What I might do is hand over to Mike, who's the sixth person on the screen. What we're going to do with Mike is a very quick beer tasting. So Mike represents the Pittsburgh Brewers Guild, which is our partner in these first three modules today, and they're the driver of the fourth module. And Mike's here in his capacity as a representative of a local Pittsburgh brewery called Dancing Gnome, and they generally specialize in doing hazy beers. But today it's a little bit of a departure. So for those of you that got a gift package in the mail through the love of God and UPS, Mike, would you like to give a quick rundown maybe on some Brewers Guild high-level stuff and then a quick outline of the advanced beer from Dancing Gnome, please?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for partnering with us on this. I think it's been a great day so far. We've talked a lot about the engineering side behind beer, some of the tasting aspects of beer, and now writing about beer. And so what we have coming up next is a few panelists who are going to talk about how we can make a few bucks by selling beer. And specifically looking at taste and or space, and how you can leverage the brew house space or the tap room space, or even to-go interactions to deliver on your brand, to deepen or drive more customer loyalty, and to grow and flourish as a brewery. So that's what will be coming up next. And then, as Marcus said, I work at Dancing Gnome, which is a brewery in Sharpsburg, a handful of miles up the river from downtown Pittsburgh. And we do traditionally focus on, in the 4 years we've been open, we focus on hazy styles or hazy New England style IPAs. But there is a deep love by the owner and the general manager, Andrew Witchey and Mike Dunlay, a deep love of traditional styles. And so just in 2020 and really over the last couple months, we've done a lot of different traditional styles, Belgian Wit, Kolsch, and English Dark Mild. But the one that we included in the pack that went out to the panelists is Bance. It's a 4.6% English bitter. It's got some very nice balance. I think it's EKG and Target hops with some Golden Promise and other English specialty malts as the backbone. And so we hope that you all, particularly coming after Mitch talked extensively and in detail about the history of the IPA. This is a little bit of a different traditional English ale, but we hope you get a chance to try it and enjoy it, as I am now. So hopefully you can also stick around for our discussion about space and hear from our panelists. We have Kate Bernot from Goodwill Hunting, Tim Brady from Whetstone Station Brewery in Brattleboro, Vermont. He's also the BA's service ambassador, and Joel Houston from First Key Brewery Consulting. And Joel focuses on how breweries can leverage their taproom space and the decor and the ambiance and everything about the taproom to again engage customers in a deeper way. So that's what we have coming up.
Cool, thanks, Mike.
Absolutely.
Anything anybody else has 5 minutes to say something they really care about that they haven't said already would be appreciated. Obviously, thank you guys for your time. It's almost killed me to put this thing together, so I'm glad you all made it in one piece. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Ashton. Thanks, Mitch. Any further questions? Anything to finish off that maybe would be thinking more about the future than current experience, perhaps?
It looks, Marcus, like there is a question that's up on the screen now.
Yeah.
Cool. Fantastic.
So the question is, did digging into the history influence IPAs you've produced since then? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I remember we did a beer for Stone's 14th anniversary that was an Imperial IPA, which is what we brewed for our anniversary beers almost every year. But this one was 100% English ingredients, and we tried to capture some of the things that we had learned about 1800s English IPAs and incorporate some of that into the beer. And it was a wonderful experience, and that was one of our more popular anniversary releases. And then now with New Realm, we've done an English-inspired IPA every year. It's called Tap the Admiral, and it's a fun beer for us to brew and taste. Unfortunately, in today's IPA world, if it's not hazy or tropically fruity, it's kind of a tough sell. And so we don't brew a lot of it, but I would love it if we could brew more of this beer.
Okay, guys, I have maybe a couple more questions, just to kind of try to encompass everything here. Some of you, Pete, obviously you're a professional writer. You've all shown some talent with this. What would you say to folks who run breweries, or maybe folks who are involved in marketing with products, about the importance of trying, maybe not writing a book, but learning about writing, learning about how to present this kind of information in a form that's going to be helpful to consumers, and then ultimately to your operation. What would you say about getting started with this stuff?
I think one comment on that is that this has become a cliche, but cliches become cliches because they're true.
Sure.
But it's about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of people kind of seem to discover for themselves, but they discover the same thing that we've known for generations, is that if you want to engage people with your product, with your company, with your passion or your interest, it's about putting it together in a story that's meaningful for the people who are listening to it. Whether that's adding human interest, whether it's adding drama, whether it's adding being honest about the twists and turns. And I've read quite a lot recently about on brewery tours, because that's as much of a form of communication as a book is, really. Mm-hmm. The foundation story of the brewery is kind of this essential part of the brewery tour. I need to know, like, these two guys who met each other when they were traveling and discovered a mutual passion for these kind of beers, and then they said, hell, let's start brewing in the shed. It's whatever that story is, it has to be told. And if there's a story to a beer, my latest book is about beer design and can label art, and names of beers are becoming increasingly cryptic. People want to know the story behind the name, and that story is usually something that happened to the founders when they were on holiday, or something about a pet, or something like that. And it's stories engage us, and we remember them much more than we just remember a list of facts, however. Okay,
Mitch or Ashton, what are your thoughts about just giving this stuff a shot for the first time?
Yeah, for me, it was. I definitely approached it like we were telling a story. We were telling a story of the history of a beer, and for those of you that have read my book, there's some personal stuff in there as well that I thought added to that. And I think Pete is right. It's all about storytelling and capturing people and getting them interested in what you're talking about. And I really tried to strike a balance between that and the data, because I knew the data was an important part of the book as well, and the recipes were important. And I tried to include a little story with each recipe, and what the beer was about and what the inspiration was. And I think, so I agree. I think it was important.
Okay, Ashton, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mitch and Pete on the storytelling. The one thing that I've noticed with people that write, and I think your original question was, if you want to, for the brewers, brewery owners in the group, how do you get out and interact with people with words? And I think one thing that I've seen on social media, and it kind of waxes and wanes over time, but there's a temptation for some people to tell their story, but also to bring other other companies into their story through negativity. And I think it's really, really important to avoid that at all costs. Don't trash talk the competition. Don't get in the gutter. And with social media, there seems to be a real temptation for that sort of negativity. And I think it's harmful for our industry to engage in that kind of behavior. So, I mean, not to be a downer, but it's like, let's be happy. Tell your own story. Don't worry about what the other people are doing.
That's great advice.
So I work for BSG. That's my day job. The brewery is my hobby. We sell ingredients, and got to plug BSG. Part of the story for me as a brewer is the story of the ingredients. Where did the malt come from?
Okay,
what are the story of the hops? The yeast strain. As a beer geek, I want to know about the history of the yeast. And to me, that's part of the story of what I'm putting in my mouth.
Okay. Hey, listen, guys, I think we've been through everything that we're going to go through. Pete, Mitch, and Ashton, I want to personally thank you guys for joining us and having a great discussion. I definitely also want to thank the NBA District Pittsburgh for asking me to do this. It has been a nice break in the middle of my afternoon to get to talk to you guys and hopefully come up with some stuff that's been helpful for everybody. Marcus, give it back to you.
Genius idea, having listened to all of you gentlemen, and it is probably trying to equate different methods of alcohol production with different social media platforms. Which one would be beer and which one wouldn't? But which one would be distilling? Which one would be, I don't know, maybe scrumpy or something? But we can come back to that another time. Getting out of here right now. We're obviously leaving words, which has been particularly successful. Thank you all. Moving on to Space, which, as Mike said, is hosted by the local Brewers Guild. Ashton, I can do the plugs as well. So BSG, ever supportful. Thanks particularly to our local rep, Grant, who has just been so supportive over the last 12 months through normal meetings, through haphazard organized webinars, and then through this slightly bigger event we put together today. Moving on, we're also very happy with the support we get from Andrew and all his team at Craft Beer Professionals. As I've said before, one of the best Facebook groups available, just 11,000 people that all just want to know stuff and hopefully turn up to this. Moving on, Pittsburgh Brewers Guild, I think they'll get enough of your time in the next hour after this, so you'll get to learn what they're all about. And us. So thank you very much, all of you from the Master Brewers District of Pittsburgh, and let's leave it at that and sign out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. Again, thanks to Mike for moderating. Thanks to all of our panelists. And again, to thank our sponsors. Just a short clip from BSG and Chris Malt about one of their products. So thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you in the Space module.
In the heart of Speyside. Working with local farmers to grow the finest distilling barley. Using our 150 years of malting know-how, we transform these precious grains into malt. Through our age-old wet smoking method and purpose-built kilns, we capture the essence of peat. So that you can bottle the essence of Scotland. Crisp, the finest malt since 1870.